Our scripture reading this morning comes from Luke chapter 10, beginning with the 38th verse, and you'll recognize this. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen the better part, and it will not be taken from her." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I cannot tell you how many sermons that I have heard preached on those verses. How many of you have heard at least 3? Yeah, there you go. Lots of sermons on Mary and Martha in this world. Mostly, when a preacher talks about Mary and Martha, the sermons support Mary's choice to sit with Jesus and hear what he had to say. They elevate the status of a student of the Word over the status of the worker in the kitchen. I'm not sure that's a great idea. Sometimes I have heard sermons preached that exalted Martha's choice to be in the kitchen because there's a lot of hard physical work that goes on in the church that is desperately needed if the church is to get anywhere. And so it is appropriate that we recognize Martha's commitment to the life of the church. I have even heard a sermon that said Martha was jealous and resented the fact that she was left out of the teaching in the other room. I have to ask you, if all you have to choose to do is to choose to walk from one room to another and no one will stop you, how are you left out? But I have known people who would think they were. So possibly that was an excellent thought by the pastor that preached that sermon. More about Martha later. But now let's look on the house, in the room, what was going on at the time. There Jesus is sitting in, probably a 2-room house. Big place. Kitchen, other room. So, everybody else is in the other room, Martha's in the kitchen. Jesus was teaching, and whenever Jesus was teaching, there were several things happening at once. On many occasions when Jesus was teaching, he was reinterpreting the law for his listeners. Jesus said in Matthew 5, and I'm sure you'll remember, several times he said, "You have heard it said, so and so and so. But I tell you, this, that, and the other thing." Right? He did that. That's reinterpreting the law. Jesus was good about that. He did it over and over in many places. And there's no reasoning to believe that he wasn't teaching the people based on Scripture, which he would reinterpret for them for their time right then. Even in Jesus' time, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy were a minimum of 1,000 years old. Maybe closer to 2. So even in his time, those 5 books of the Bible had been around a long time. Might be that they needed a little exegesis for people to understand them. So what he did was he took Scripture and refreshed its meaning for the hearers of his day. Another thing that happened when Jesus was teaching was that he did not send the women out of the room. Ladies, if you can stand, please do. Now, fellas, look around and see what little work would get done if we put them all outside. Thanks be to God, we have come to our senses. In those days, part of the reason that women could not go, the temple had several courts, you know. They had the Holy of Holies, then it had the court of the priests, then it had the court of the Levites, then it had the court of the men, then it had the court of the women, and then it had the court of the Gentiles. Every time you got to a new court, you got further and further from the Holy of Holies, which was the home of God. Well, the women were next to last because women were unclean all the time. If you go back to how you get clean and all that, ritually purified, women are unclean all but about one day. So, first off, you weren't ritually clean enough to hear the scripture. And guess what? Women were considered completely incompetent to know, understand, or apply the law. I can just imagine trying to teach that today. But I'm not going to start there. Let's go back to Martha a minute. Part of what was going on in Martha's mind as Jesus is sitting there teaching a renewed version, a today's version of their Bible. Part of what was going on in her mind was that first and foremost, Jesus was breaking with tradition. He was bad about that. And when you break with tradition, there's a bad thing going on in the minds of almost everyone present. A one-word bad thing. Who can tell me what it is? Anybody going once? Going twice? Progress. Close. Change. It's only progress if you're going in the right direction. I'm making good time, I just don't know where I am. Change was a bad thing. We still kind of think change is a bad thing. Anytime something changes, especially something major in our lives, we react to change out of fear. Martha was afraid that if Mary, well, among the things Martha was afraid of, Martha was afraid that if Mary sat in with Jesus on this occasion and nobody did anything about it, every time Jesus came to her house, Mary would sit out in the living room and Martha would be stuck doing the work in the kitchen. Never get any help ever again if he allowed this to happen. I can see that. On the other hand, Martha was also afraid, there are three hands in this, I think. On the other hand, Martha was also afraid that if Mary behaved like this in front of other men, when Jesus was not around to protect her, she'd get in trouble. She was also afraid that if Jesus kept on letting women like Mary sit in with him, and then all of them started acting like that, not only would they get in trouble, nobody would ever eat or live in a clean house again because the men sure weren't going to step up and do that. So she had some concerns that, might have been valid. But generally, when something changes, we react first out of fear. We are afraid that it's something we grew up with, something we believe to be true, something we believe to be necessary, or something that's just always been that way and we've gotten used to it. If that changes, will we be able to count on anything anymore? Most of us have built our lives in such a way that it looks like a house of cards. And if we pull any card out, our whole life will fall apart. Folks, I gotta tell you, it's not true. We can take out a bunch of cards and put new ones in, and our life will not fall apart. There are many things in this world that are true, and their truth doesn't change. We're not going to talk about all of them, just three. First one is what I believe is a universal human characteristic. We do not like change. We want to be comfortable, and we cannot be comfortable in a sea of change. We just plain don't like it. How many of us believe that's true? Well, see, some of you are just timid to say you believe it's true. I know. The second truth is everything is changing all the time. You know, it does not matter whether you believe it, deny it, or rebel against it with all your might. That does not change the truth of it. Everything is changing all the time. Third and last is because change is always happening. And we hate change so much. Change is the cause of most of our pain and suffering. Well, maybe not change itself. Maybe our reaction to change is the cause of most of our pain and suffering. You know, change and fear are related. And fear and pain and suffering are related. When we have change, we always get fear. When we get fear, we always get pain and suffering. You ever been afraid when it didn't just make your heart go strange, your stomach come up in your throat? Pain and suffering. And the longer it lasts, the worse it gets. For most of us, that is exactly where this world is today. We were going along okay. Real estate values were good. You know, everything was pretty nice. And all of a sudden, 2008 just smacked up. And it was like we were going up a mountain road, and suddenly the engine quit, and the brakes only half worked. Now we're rolling backwards, not really able to stop the loss. And certain we are out of control. And if there's any control freaks in here, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands. I know who you are. All of you. As soon as we figure out we are not in control, fear, pain, and suffering set in, and they do not let us go. We can't fix that one. Governments all over the world and the best economic minds there are pulling their hair out because they can't change it either. The world is changing in a big way, and we're just going to have to ride this roller coaster. Sorry to tell you that one. But I got to tell you, another change is happening. Change is happening in the church. If the world changing outside is not bad enough, you can't even come here and have things be the same. You know why? Because I'm not Ben. You guys love Ben. You had him for a year and a half or more. He's a wonderful guy. If anybody ever deserved your love and respect, he does. But let me tell you, I am hecking gone from Ben. He's a great guy. But he and I are not the same guy. And that's plenty of change right there. You know, the first thing people wonder when the new guy gets here is what's he going to change next? What's the first thing he's going to do to yank the rug out from under my feet?